So that's pretty much the sermon. I hope it gave you a sense of why I'm so taken with her and why I wanted to introduce her to you. It seems especially apt to do so for National Indigenous Peoples Day, because what the colonizers espoused and what traditional Christianity too often espouses is dominion over the earth and its resources, not being a partner with it. So are we ready to give up this false history of the valiant explorers, the discoverers, and commit to learning more about the harm that they did and to learn more about Indigenous peoples and their gifts? As Maya Angelou famously said, you do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. I learned a lot this week about Native Americans as I prepared for this service, about what Dr. Joseph P. Gahn, the faculty director of the Harvard University Native American program, calls the exploitation, enslavement, eradication, and erasure of Indigenous people. Here's a very brief snapshot of the situation for Native Americans from the National Indian Council on Aging website. Today, 1 in 3 Native Americans live in poverty. And American Indian and Alaska Native households are far more likely to face homelessness and live in significantly overcrowded conditions than other people. Native Americans die by suicide and struggle with substance abuse at far higher rates than any other ethnic group. And violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people occur at shocking levels. 84% of Native women report having experienced violence in their lives, 84%. And Native women and girls are murdered at a rate 10 times higher than women of other ethnicities. In 2016, the last year for which data is available, 5,712 Indigenous women and girls were reported missing or murdered. And without any of the press coverage that happens when a single white middle-class woman disappears on a road trip with her boyfriend, as we just saw. So these data, they call us as Unitarian Universalists to do more to engage with the needs of Indigenous people. I learned from Gail this week that the Amamutsun tribal band leaders are currently working with the Watsonville Wetlands Watch to train youth and residents of Watsonville to plant, nurture, and understand native plant species. And I wonder how else you here might support Indigenous people in your area. And that brings me back to Dr. Kimmerer and her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. Indigenous people braid the sweetgrass so it looks like this piece that I bought from Etsy online. It has a delightful fragrance. Braided sweetgrass is understood as a gift of gratitude and compassion. Dr. Robin writes that, quote, when we braid sweetgrass, we are braiding the hair of Mother Earth, showing her our loving attention, our care for her beauty and well-being, and gratitude for all she has given us. Dr. Kimmerer grew up in a family that revered nature and understood their part in it. But when she went to school, to white people's school, she was told it was wrong. She tells a heartbreaking story in the book about an interview for her first college botany class when she was asked by the professor, why do you want to major in botany? And she answered, because I want to learn why asters and goldenrod look so beautiful together. She reports that the professor answered her with derision. That isn't science. If you want to study beauty, you should go to art school. He reluctantly allowed her to take his general botany class, and he later wrote on her recommendation for her master's program, she's done remarkably well for an Indian girl. The essence of the book Braiding Sweetgrass is to help us understand interdependence. Dr. Robin asks us to think, what does the earth ask of us? She challenges us not just to be grateful for the gifts of nature, as I'm sure most of you are, but to offer the earth reciprocity. She says her graduate students always, quote, demonstrate a deep respect and affection for nature. They say that nature is the place where they experience their greatest sense of belonging and well-being. That sounds a lot like Unitarian Universalists I know. But she then asks her students, and I will ask you, do you think the earth loves you back? She says, no one is ever willing to answer that. Does the earth love you back? And she then asks them, what would happen if people believed this crazy idea that the earth loves them back? What would happen if we believed the earth loves us back? If we did, we would move from understanding ourselves as the subduers of the earth to realize that we are partners in a sacred, interconnected relationship. Dr. Rodman tells a story of learning how to make bark baskets, a difficult and arduous task. The teacher brings her a tangled basket of reeds, and he asks her before she begins her lesson, think of the tree and all its hard work before you start. It gave its life for this basket, so you know your responsibility. You must make something beautiful in return. Dr. Rodman encourages us to look deeply at what the plant and animal world gives to us each and every day. She says, what if we looked at everything first to see its origin? So I'm going to suggest to you today, when you sit down for lunch, ask yourself, what life was given up so that I can have a tuna fish or a turkey sandwich? What plants gave up their lives for your lunch? Who planted the food on your table? Who picked that food? Who trucked it? Who shelved it? Who sold it? All before we could sit down and have a tuna fish sandwich. How infrequently do we think of the humans, no less than the animals and plants, that make our life possible? As I look at this braid of sweetgrass, the lessons this book taught me is not just to look at its beauty or smell its beautiful fragrance, but to ask, which plant gave up its life for me to have this? Who picked this? Who braided it? What are its hidden stories? To quote Lin-Manuel Miranda, ask yourself, who lives? Who dies? Who tells your stories? Dr. Kimmerer writes about learning the tribal language that had been denied to her as a child when her family was forced to only use English. She writes that unlike English, 70% of Potawatomi words are verbs. There is no noun, for example, for Saturday. It is to be a Saturday, to be a hill, to be the bay. When she first studied her people's language, she resisted that idea of verbs rather than nouns. And then in struggling with the word to be a bay, she suddenly gets it. In that moment, she writes, I could smell the water of the bay. I could watch it rock against the shore and hear it sift onto the sand. A bay is a noun only if the water is dead. When a bay is a noun, it's defined by humans trapped between shores, contained by the word. But the verb, wigawagama, to be a bay, releases the water from bondage and lets it live. To be a bay holds the wonder for that for this moment, the living water has decided to shelter itself between these shores, conversing with cedar roots and flocks of birds, because it could do otherwise. It could have become a stream or an ocean or a waterfall. Isn't that beautiful? And doesn't it change how you're going to understand the word bay next time you see one? It's as if the bay is speaking to us, calling us into a relationship with it. My most important takeaway from Braiding Sweetgrass was that, quote, we as humans are to find ways to enter into reciprocity with the more than human world. I learned from this book that we share the planet with 6 million other species. 6 million species. And so I've learned to ask a flower before I pick it, are you ready to be picked? And not to, if I don't get that permission. Our reciprocity with the earth could include you planting a garden or working in the church gardens, becoming part of a green sanctuary project, working for environmental justice or to mitigate climate change, using less plastic, eating less meat, making art with the nature around you, getting involved with advocating for the rights of Native Americans, opposing projects that are encroaching on Native lands, speaking out In John Lewis's words, causing good trouble. You know, the list is almost endless. Gratitude. Gratitude is at the heart of spiritual practice. Awareness and thankfulness for all the gifts we've been given, including the gift of nature, the gifts of knowing each other. Gratitude requires a responsibility, though, to give back. Dr. Robin says, gratitude alone is not enough. She reminded me that all beings have special gifts. Birds know how to fly. Trees know how to make bark. Stars and planets give us light. And so do we, my friends. Each of us have special gifts to offer the earth and to each other. Braided sweetgrass is a reminder of gratitude, kindness, and reciprocity. So let me ask you, my friends, how will you use your gifts to bless this world? How will you love the earth back? We owe it nothing less.